My last book, A State of Fear, was all about the fear-mongering to induce compliance with draconian lockdown rules. But one of the parts that put shivers down my spine was when I interviewed several SPI-B advisors, but one of them really chilled my blood, because when I asked what the plan was for getting the British public back to normal, if you elevate people's fear, if you're going to scare them, what's your plan for bringing it back down? Because that's what you do in a laboratory situation if you were frightening people as part of a weird lab rat psychology experiment. And he said, what do you mean get people back to normal? Because we're going from COVID into a climate crisis. People have to reduce their carbon. And I was like, whoa.
The connection was being made even.
It was, well, not the same sort of absolutely, but all over the place. I mean, that for me was straight from the horse's mouth from a SPI-B advisor. None of the SPI-B advisors I spoke to had any plan for de-escalating fear, which I think is highly unethical. One part of it is unethical.
We should say with the behavioural people.
The scientific pandemic.
How people respond to them.
Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behaviour, the social scientists who advise the government on questions to do with social science, so the psychology of locking down. But it wasn't just him, of course. At the time, Lindsay Hoyle said, well, people have shown they can change their habits for COVID, they can change their habits for climate. There were academics saying that the lockdown had created a window of malleability and it's time to change people's habits. I think the signs were there during the pandemic that this was coming. But then in 2021, the Nudge Unit, which at the time was part-owned by the government, wrote an absolutely astonishing report with Sky, which is a licensed broadcaster, about how to use the power of TV, that's the title of the report, to make people decarbonise their lifestyle. I mean, it suggested doing things like inserting storylines in types of programmes, and some of them were just exactly the kinds of things that nerds in glasses who think about psychology will come up with. You could insert a storyline about recycling for a family into a comedy. Oh, that's quite the gauntlet throw. We're going to make that funny.
DIY show. I mentioned at one point.
Product placement, news segments. Right, so this brings me to the Sky News coverage. It is insane at the moment. It is absolutely insane. And they're using a number of behavioural psychology techniques to make us obsess about the weather. So, for instance, that car on fire, they say car bursts into flames on LA freeway and blistering heat wave. Yes, but those things aren't necessarily connected.
And they'll do that kind of cough, cough. Of course, we have no reason to believe. But even so, that
the line underneath, this isn't necessarily heat related. Yeah, but you're basically telling us it is, but then adding a caveat to cover yourself because you sound like such blundering fools. We're not idiots. But this is something called the truth illusory effect. If you do the same thing over and over, just through the repetition, it will start to sink in. So I could watch one of these reports and go, oh, don't be so foolish. Otherwise, there'd be no cars in Saudi Arabia. Of course, you can have cars in the heat. But, maybe by the time I've seen my fifth car on fire or patch of scorched earth after a wildfire or someone who's melted or whatever, maybe I'll start believing it. So it has that effect. And of course, they keep using these figures, which I think we can say made up. Oh, it's predicted to be 48 degrees. Well, it's not 48 degrees yet. But then the number 48 sticks in your head. You're almost waiting for it to be 48. Or modelling. So we've seen heat-related deaths being modelled, i.e. made up. Because you can't gather the death registrations from all around Europe right now in real time and say there's people died of heat. But it's all about salience. They're trying to put the number into your head. So there's a lot of behavioural psychology tricks right now in the news on licensed broadcasters.